Let's look at this bold move by Tinubu to decentralize Nigerian military training base. Because before now, the only military training base we have in Nigeria is Zaria. That is Kaduna State. And currently, we are seeing a new one in Osogbo. I think that's Osun State. And Nigerians are already reacting. But again, this is something no other southern president have done in the past. Even an Obasanjo, who of course is a military veteran, could not even dare this. A Jonathan didn't do it. But surprisingly, in what do like trying to cut the Fulani and the North to size in terms of the power they wield in Nigerian military and other areas of Nigeria where they, of course, dominate, we are seeing a bold move to decentralize military training base. Of course, I think it's a good one because it is not even proper that the whole thing is concentrated in the North, because at least the South should have some sense of belonging. Because before now, we understand that when the president in the past made the move to, of course, move some department of CBN to Lagos State, we saw stiff resistance, we saw opposition to that. But at the end of the day, the government actually actualized that because their intention was to move those departments of CBN to the commercial hub, of course, where the services are properly needed for purpose of efficiency and all of that. We only saw when a department of FAN was intended to move to Lagos State from Abuja, the opposition that arose from it, from the northern figures as well. But this time around, this is a very big move from the government. For the first time in the history of Nigeria, establishing another military training base in the southern part of the country. But again, let us quickly look at the first reaction. This one is, let me read from Vanguard. This one is coming from Pan-Yoruba groups applaud Tinubu on Osogbo military training depot. You go for that to say that the Pan-Yoruba Social Cultural Organization, Think Yoruba First, TYF, has commended President Bola Tinubu's bold move of setting up a military training depot in Ogun State. I think it's supposed to be Osun State. You go for that to say that in a statement, the group public relations officer, Ogbeni Olubenga Lewis, noted that it is dangerous for the country to place the entire architecture of military training in one region. Speaking further, I say, according to the statement, Nigerians from all over the world were elated to receive the confirmation of the creation of a second military training post in Osogbo, Osun State, by General Musa, Chief of Defense Staff. It is not only the first in Yoruba land, but also the first over outside Zaria, Kaduna State. I think this landmark. Of course, this is the first time we are seeing such a development. But again, what this means is the monopoly of most of all these areas of life that the North hitherto control is now being decentralized. Because I think at some point, most of all these areas where the North have advantage, unfair advantage, let me even put it unfair advantage, need to be corrected. Because if you look at the composition of Nigeria as an entity, you begin to ask some question. In the first instance, how did we arrive at the composition of states in Nigeria? Because for me, it is not anything that was done through justice, equity, and fairness, because it was the military that actually created all the states as we have it, and they were using decree, and it was done on the basis of favoritism, not on the basis of equity, fairness, and justice. That must explain the reason you can clearly see the North having 19 states, as against the 17 that is in the southern part of the country. That must explain the reason you can clearly see the southeastern part of the country having just 5 states, as against the 6 in other geographical zones, and I think in one of the geographical zones is having 7. You begin to wonder and ask, on what basis is Kano having 44 local governments, Jigawa having 27 local governments, and Jigawa was carved out of Kano State. So if you put the two together, you are talking about 71 local governments. And this is an area that brings little or nothing to the federal coffer. Because personally, I have a first-hand experience in terms of staying in one of the northern states, Jigawa to be precise, during my youth service years. Of course, if you are posted to serve in local government secretariat, there's a common language. They say ba aiki, meaning there's no work. So what all the workers in the local government secretariat, what they do is they only come to work at the end of the month when allocation will come. Once they receive their salary, the local government appointees and even local government chairmen collect their money, they all retire to different parts of the country and wait for another month. So it is a ritual thing, there is a routine thing. And that is because they are only depending on revenue that comes from federal government. They are not generating any revenue. And they are feeding fat on this. So I think at some point, most of all these things need to be addressed. That is why when even the government came up with the idea of tariff reform bills, we were thinking that it was an avenue to address most of all those anomalies. But unfortunately, the North rose against it. And this time around, through their number in National Assembly, they were able to water it down. To the point that all the areas they were not comfortable with, all the areas they felt that it is going to erode their revenue, they expunged it. And the version they finally passed, which of course the president assented to, already watered down the whole thing. So the point is, if not for the undue advantage given to them by those who created the states, they will not have the number they are using to do most of all these things. And each time you write to want to correct those anomalies, they always put up a defense, because the North is the greatest beneficiary of the current status quo, or the current fraudulent status quo of Nigeria as an entity. And again, at the same time, they refuse to give their children proper education. And the inability for them to even give their children proper education is even causing problems for everybody in the country. Because currently, there is serious high level of out of school children in the North. And I saw a report from UN recently that talk about how, of course, terrorist bandits explore those vulnerable Nigerians or those vulnerable Africans, those vulnerable people in the third world country, how they exploit them to be recruited into banditry, into terrorism and all of that. So you begin to wonder, why on earth will a country like Nigeria, in some states, you see 60-70%, 50-70%, 40-70%, 30-70% out of school children. And in some cases, it translates into more than 1 million in some states. You begin to wonder, you are talking about children of age bracket between 6 and 16. You are saying about 60-70% of that age bracket are not in school, and which translates into about 1 million people. Of course, I must say that these are potential Boko Haram members you are breeding. These are potential bandits. There's no better way to see it. So the question is, with all the resources that is going into the North, why is it difficult for them to educate their children? More so, as a Jonathan government made conscious effort to take them out of that quagmire, because we remember that under President Jonathan, the government of Jonathan was building Manjeri schools in almost every nook and cranny of the North. But the North did not see it as a good thing. Let me even say the leaders in the North never saw it as a good thing. Because otherwise, by now, they should have taken the cue from there and start in that trajectory. Why is it that none of the northern state governors saw it as a good thing to take it off from there? But at the end of the day, Jonathan was rejected by the North. He was voted out. But after being voted out, they did not see it as a necessity to continue in that trajectory. Understand that they did not value value Islamic knowledge, no doubt, and nobody is saying they should not do that, because they will always want their children to go and acquire Islamic knowledge. But the question is, as you acquire Islamic knowledge, those children should be given opportunity to acquire Western education to add to their life. Because whether we like it or not, that will help the region to develop their human capital. Because even before now, if not for the proliferation of private schools, whether at the level of tertiary institutions, secondary schools, you would have understand that the North have successfully asked the southern part of the country to vote for them through coastal system. Whether in the federal government tertiary, whether in the federal government schools, unitary secondary schools, whether in federal universities and all of that, quota system was a way of the North asking the South to vote for them. And one thing it does is it promotes mediocrity above meritocracy, because it gives undue advantage to those who are not knowledgeable enough, who are not intelligent enough to compete with their peers in the southern part of the country. And that has been the order of the day, if not for the proliferation of private schools and state-owned schools. So, for me, I always say it, that the North have a lot to do to save this country from all this bad situation. Only recently, we saw the governor of Zamfara State making it very clear that some of the bandits are those, of course, who hail from their states, who they know where they come from. What does that tell you? It's very clear. It tells someone that these people are doing this because they could not get good education, parental care, societal care from the cradle. Because any child is born and allowed to go in the wild without proper parental care, without proper societal care, the evil ones, the bandits, the terrorists will write their own value system in that child. Hence, the psychologist sees the brain of the newly born child as a tabula rasa, a clean slate, on which the caretaker write anything he or she wishes to write. So by the time the society, the guardian, stakeholders refuse to write the norms of the society into the child, of course, bandits, Boko Haram, will help them to write their own value system. I think that's the consequence we are all facing. Seeing our children, youths, could be recruited into banditry, in some cases, into suicide bombing, which could have been prevented if those people get proper orientation. So whether they not like it or not, they have a duty, particularly the leaders, have a duty and responsibility to train their children. Because the money that is being used to fight insecurity would have been used to address all other areas of human endeavor. And as we have it, that same insecurity we are seeing in the North, that was so hard restricted to the North, is now being exported to the southern part of the country. Because the level of insecurity we now have in the southern part of the country is almost equating what is in the northern part of the country. Talking about kidnapping, raping, maiming, kidnapping for ransom, banditry, and all of that. Before now, it is only restricted to the northern part of the country. The only difference we now have is that there is no known bandit leader of southern extraction. Like we have the likes of Toji Bello, the likes of Ada Aleru, who are purely people from the north. But their lieutenants already infiltrated into the southern part of the country to come and wreak havoc. So that is why the earlier is addressed, the better. So that even all the attempts, all the effort of federal government to woo investors into the economy will be eaten on mirage if this insecurity is not addressed. Because it's very clear that no investor will want to bring his money, his personals, into an atmosphere of insecurity. into an atmosphere where kidnapping for ransom, kidnapping and killing is order of the day. That is why I'm making it very clear that the federal government should know that Nigerians, particularly the patriotic ones, are solidly behind the government in their quest to rid the society of bandits. For me, the best the government could do is to go ahead to acquire monopoly of currency power, smoke the bandits out of their holes, set them running, and bring them to justice to act as deterrent to others. Whether the likes of Ada Aleru, the likes of Toji Bello, they must all be taught the bitter lesson of the might of a nation. Because for me, life is sacrosanct, and those people do not have value for human life. That's why I totally agree with the former governor of Kaduna State, talking about Malam Nasir El-Rufai, who made it very clear, repeatedly, that bandits do not repent. That the best way to handle bandits is to disallow them, send them to their creator, who have the ultimate power to judge them. I think the military, the local vigilantes are currently doing wonderful work in different theaters of operation. We saw the one that came from Delta State recently, Abraka to be precise. Shortly after that, we saw the one that came from Owashuku, of course, a situation where locals led the military personnel into the bushes, into the forest to crack down the bandits. That is a nice one, because we understand that the locals have the intelligence that needed to nip crime in the bud. All the actionable intelligence rests with the locals. And we probably saw another one in Kwara State, where the locals of course put a very big show, and we saw a handful of the bandits being arrested. A similar one equally happened in Katsina State. And like I always say, wherever the success is coming from, whether on the part of the locals, on the part of the security agencies, Army, DSS, Navy, in some areas where the operation is needed, it's a welcome development. But we understand that the time those Mahmuda bandit leaders were arrested, two of them, it was DSS that did the wonderful work. So I think we commend them. That is why, of course, the Director General of DSS, who made it very clear that the locals should be integrated into the security arrangement. And since that statement, we are already seeing serious success, good success, coming from the angle of the locals. And in most cases, anytime they collaborate with the armed forces to go against the bandits, there's huge success. I think the huge success is not, the reason is not far-fetched, because they know the terrain better, and it's been established that all crime is local. So if all crime is local, the locals have both intelligence, know the terrain, more than the normal security personnel who may be drafted from different parts of the country, who do not naturally know the terrain. But at this point, I think I must say a very big thank you for time. Please settle me down now, Mr. Mott.